So I want to start today with something that we all have in common. It isn't a religious thing. It's not a Christian thing. It's just a people thing. Something that we're all really, we're good at it. And the reason we're so good at it is we've been doing it for quite some time. We begin in middle school to perfect it, and then in high school, and then as adults, we just keep honing this skill. And the official title for this thing that we do, I'm just going to call it image management. That's where we showcase our strength and we camouflage our not so strengths. So see, image management is about selling a version of ourselves, the best version of ourselves, while at the same time hiding part of ourselves. And that's not bad. It's not a criticism. I mean, you don't really want to know everything about me. You just want to have this kind of a vision of, well, Kurt's a pretty good guy, vision of me. And honestly, I'll return the favor. I don't need to know, don't want to know everything about you. I mean, each of you, I'm sure, here, there, everywhere, you're wonderful, pleasant people, right? So we'll just kind of keep it that way. That's one of the reasons I believe that a marriage or another long-term commitment with an individual is good for us, because at least one person knows everything about us. And maybe one is enough. So image management is natural, understandable, even advisable. And because of image management, then we bring our A game to certain places, right? That first date. Oh my, how long did we look in the mirror? How did we do our hair? Did we make sure we dressed just right? Did we smell just right? That's image management, right? Or that time you realize you're going to meet your potential in-laws, or you're going for your job interview. Or even as a kid, if we've been goofing off lately, but we know we're kind of angling our parents, we want to get something from them. Well, image management, man. We're gonna do what we can, to see if we can get them to agree to something for us. You guys know this, right? Those of you watching there too. You know this because you're smart. Your emotional intelligence is high, and you also know that once your relationship is established and then trust begins, then that's when we begin to open up to other people. And you begin to tell what is the rest of your story. So it reminds me, of some of the small groups that Betsy and I have been involved in over the years, and perhaps you have been as well. So in a small group, maybe you're doing a book study, maybe you're doing a Bible study, or maybe you're just there intentionally to build relationships. You kind of start off what you might say, like on first base, you start off with those G-rated stories. You might, well, how was your week, Kurt? Well, man, I got cut off this week in traffic, and let me tell you, I was so mad at that person. That's an easy thing to share, right? Because that's something that we all, that we all can relate to. But then as you begin to become a cohesive group, you might be able to say, man, the kids are driving me nuts. I mean, in a painful way. I mean, not just like, oh yeah, Or then as the group gets closer, you find yourself being free to say, well, Billy got arrested this week, and here's why. You don't say that the first time that you're together with someone, and then as the group really matures, you find yourself helping someone in the group go through a divorce. And those are actual situations that Betsy and I have experienced as a group came together and shared life and love and hurt and tragedy and divorce together. Somewhere in time you feel safe sharing some of your less than stellar things that you've done. And the reason I bring this up today is because apparently nobody told Matthew about this. See, Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew, and he begins to make his case for who Jesus is but he does it all wrong. He goes about it backwards. See, he doesn't begin, with that precious birth narrative where, I'm going to tell you about Mary and Joseph and how they were on a donkey and they made their way to a manger and there was no place in the inn, and this guy opened up and said, I got a place for you in the back there, and there's a star and there's angels. No, he doesn't begin with that. He begins, as we saw last week, with a genealogy, a list of Jesus' ancestors, a family tree, where he goes, a father had a son who had a son who had a son who had a son who had a son. And as we saw last week, he goes unnecessarily out of his way to air some dirty laundry about many of Jesus' ancestors, which one would think would hurt his case rather than help it. And when I say his case, see, the case he's making is that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the anointed one. Jesus, in this case, is the anointed king. Now, for the ancient Jews, that's a big deal. For the Jews, if Matthew's going to make this case that Jesus is God's final king, then he's got to be able to connect these dots. He's got to make the case that Jesus was related to Israel's greatest king. So Matthew says right up front, he says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David. David was Israel's most famous king, and many would argue Israel's greatest king. So by Matthew's accounting, there's 14 generations between David and Jesus. Now, it's likely you've heard of David, yes. David as in David and Goliath, yes. And he was a pretty good poet. Wrote something called the 23rd Psalm. Many of us have heard of it. The Lord is my shepherd. He's like, yeah, he's okay. He might get a passing grade. So David lived about 1,000 years before Christ. He was a warrior king, and he came on as this giant killer, and he never looked back. He went on to settle regional disputes between Israel and the surrounding nations. He settled the borders. He set up commerce and trade. He brought peace to the land. And as he gets older, and he's got all of that done, all of those accomplishments, he says, you know what? Our God needs a temple. So he starts to make plans to build a temple for God. Well, God sends a prophet named Nathan. Nathan shows up and says, David, I got a word from the Lord for you. David's like, yes, give it to me. Nathan says, God doesn't want a temple. Doesn't need a temple. And by the way, you can't build it anyway because you've got too much blood on your hands. Ouch. Nathan continues. If there's going to be a temple, it'll have to be your son who builds the temple. Now there's a lot to talk about here, so much in this story, because essentially God, through the prophet, warns David, excuse me, don't try to box me in, because that's how God felt about a temple, about a place. He said the problem with a temple is that once you say this is where God is, this is where God resides, then others can say, well, if God's over there, then God's not over here, and God can't be here, there, and everywhere if God is specifically right here. And I would dare say that some people have left the modern day faith for just such the same reason. People have judged God by those who went to this box, we can call it the church, and looked at those who went to that box and said, well, if that's what God is all about, then thanks, but no thanks. See, sadly, some have left not because of God, but because of those who gathered in the temple, in the box, if you will. So anyway, back to our story. So the prophet Nathan says, David, God says you can't build a temple if there's going to be one, even though he doesn't need one, doesn't necessarily want one, but if there's going to be one, it'll have to be your son. God has a message for you, David. And so here is what God said to David through the prophet Nathan about 1,000 years before Jesus. He said, David, I'm going to make your name great. Now that had to come kind of like whew, yeah, that feels good. I mean, just after kind of getting dusted off, the first part of the word from the Lord was that hurt, didn't feel very good. But prophet continues, Nathan continues, and says, the word of the Lord is that God's going to make your name great. It'll be one of the names, the greatest names of all times. This is 3,000 years ago. Nathan wrote that. So a little quick survey of those of you here, those of you at home can play along as well. How many of you had already heard of King David before you walked in here today? Yeah, right. Yeah, so Prophet Nathan to David, check that box. Yep. You got that right. It's got to be a great name. Well, that was just for fun. Nathan says, your power, your influence, and you will be established forever. Wow, what a promise. And yet we have the long view, don't we? Just as Matthew's readers had the long view. And as Matthew was as they were going through the begats, Matthew's readers were like, wait, there's no longer a Davidic ancestor on the throne. So how can, his name's still known, but how can that be? In fact, there hadn't been a Davidic ancestor on the throne for hundreds and hundreds of years. So much time had gone by that most Jewish people had given up. They're like, well, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to be, All but a very small remnant had given up hope that Nathan's prophecy would one day again become a reality. And so it was important for Matthew to make his case that Jesus was the fulfillment of Nathan's prophecy. And so Matthew does this through this incredibly scintillating prose we call the begats. Which, as we discovered last week, once we know the story behind some of those names, it's anything but boring. And last week we dove into the story behind Tamar and Judah. And if you like the story of a public official getting caught with his metaphorical pants down, check out last week's message. So today the star of our story is David, as in King David. Some of you know the story and some of you don't, and maybe you've heard bits and pieces of this and that. Matthew wants to make sure we don't skip this part of the story. Don't gloss over it and don't try to put lipstick on that pig. See, now in a way that's hard for us to understand because we didn't grow up in the temple week in and week out hearing the stories of the Jewish patriarchs. Matthew writes these simple words. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Doesn't mean much to us, does it? It just doesn't. Oh, but to the Jewish listeners and readers of that day, I was like, oh, Matthew, just twist that knife in there. Solomon's mother was another man's wife until King David abused his power. If you want to read the whole story, it takes all of 2 very long chapters, 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. So there we would read that one day David's out on, he's the king, he's got the highest view. He's out on his veranda and he sees who he would later find out is Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. And he says to one of his servants, go get that woman and bring her back to me. And the servant comes back without her, and he says, Master, King, Sir, whatever he would say, that's the wife of Uriah. And then David basically says, I don't care who she is. He is revved up. The song, ooga chaka, I just got this feeling. That's David at that point. I mean, he is in man gear at that point. He says, I don't care who it is. Bring her here. So she's brought to him a man who had risked his life to protect David. Bring her to me. Talk about a Me Too moment, yes? They spend a night, several nights, we don't know, together. She goes home. Sometime later, 3 weeks, maybe somewhere in that time frame, 4 weeks, sends a message back to David. Sends him a note. I'm pregnant. So meanwhile, David, who should have been out fighting with his men on the battlefield, were having a tough go of it because they're trying to conquer this walled city, we're told, realizes, I got a problem. Realizes that he has a scandal on his hands, and so he recalls Uriah, Bathsheba's hubby, from the front lines just for a little status update. Brings him in, sits him in the royal conference room or whatever, and says, hey, I know you're doing some hard work down there. You're doing a great job. So tell me what's going on. So they have a chit chat, and he says, while you're here, before you go back to the battle, why don't you go down and say hi to the missus? Why don't you go and enjoy her company for a night? See you later. So the next morning, remember, this is the story that those reading the begats that you and I just kind of gloss over and roll our eyes and go, this is the story that they're aware of. So word comes back to David. Uriah slept outside last night. He never went in to be with his wife. So David calls him back and says, hey, Uriah, I gave you that night. You didn't, the blah, 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 blah. He's kind of maybe stammering over his words. I thought you would enjoy a night with the missus. And he said, I could not do that knowing my men were fighting and dying in battle. So if anyone ever wants to know someone of integrity in our scriptures, just remember the word Uriah. Wow. Well, David's like, there goes plan A. So he's resourceful. Got plan B. So he says, all right, Uriah, back to the battlefield for you. Thank you for your service. And he sends a note with one of the couriers. And the note says, when you get there, I want you to have a frontal assault on this particular part of the wall. I want Uriah to lead that assault. And as the assault's going on, I want you to pull everybody back. Oh, what a godly man. David decides, I'm going to handle this somehow. And at every turn when he tries to manage the outcome, he makes it worse, and he takes a bad story and he adds another bad chapter and another bad chapter and another bad chapter. And so for us, when we try to manage the outcome of our bad decisions, we too can add bad chapter after bad chapter after bad story. And David should have known better. Uriah dies. David marries her. She has a son. That boy dies. She gets pregnant with David, and the text tells us she gives birth to another son, and they name him Solomon. David was a busy guy. Had 78 wives, 7 or 8 wives, 19 sons that had survived into adulthood. So David's now trying to figure out who to pass his lineage on to. And there's Bathsheba with the ill-gotten gains of the son. And he might have been the one that said, you know what? Boy, that brings back bad memories. I never should have done any of that. But indeed, he chooses Solomon. Matthew's like, your Savior came from a long line of misfits, a long line of sinners. I think most of us would argue worse than you and worse than me. I mean, I don't think you've ever put a hit out on anybody like David. And God chose Solomon, who should have never, think about it, should have never been born in the first place. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. So hopefully now as you hear that and read that, you go, oh, now I see the knife. I say, okay, Matthew, we get it. We get it, we get it, we get it. Can we just jump ahead to that part where there's shepherds abiding in the fields, watching over their flocks by night, and the angel of the Lord came and shone around them and said, do not be afraid. Can we just get to that part of the Christmas story? Matthew, you're ruining the Christmas story. And Matthew would say, I'm not ruining it. I'm including you in it. See, this is God wading into the chaos of humanity. This is God wading into the chaos of sin, where we hurt ourselves and we hurt the people around us, and then we are hurt by other people, and so we hurt other people. This is God wading into the chaos of human history to do something in the world, to do something for the world, and to do something in spite of the world. And I believe, Matthew would say to us, you know what, if you read the rest of the story, the rest of what I'm about to write, if you choose Jesus, as I did, God will do something in you, for you, in spite of you. Matthew reminds us that God was so committed to restoring and healing the breach that took place in the Garden of Eden that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that he kept his promise to and through Abraham the liar, Judah the promise breaker, the slave trader who sold his own brother into slavery, through Ruth the Moabite, through David, the abusing, murdering adulterer. See, none of these stories are pretty. That's in the begats, right? None of these stories are pretty. They're better than pretty. They're for our sake. Matthew refuses to allow us to sand off or sanitize Jesus' family tree. Matthew wants us to know that while Jesus was nothing like us, he came for us. He came in spite of us. And that Jesus wasn't embarrassed to be associated with us. See, Matthew's life was forever stained, but I think we generally think of stained as a negative thing. But I want you to think of his life as stained in a good way. His life was immersed. His life was forever stained when, as a sinner, tax collector, yeah, they were even less liked then than they are today. Jesus invited him to be a part of his merry band of followers. And the next thing Matthew realizes, he said, I was invited by Jesus to follow him. He said, let me come to your house and have dinner. And Matthew's only friends were a whole bunch of other sinners, a whole bunch of other tax collectors. Excuse me. And as we're seated around this table, the despised, the most despised of the despised, who is sitting with us? A rabbi from Nazareth, sitting amongst us. Can we agree maybe at some level in some season of your life, maybe the one you're in right now, that you'd make Matthew's list? Because we've lied, we've cheated, we've been unfaithful, we've been disloyal, we've hurt people, We've murdered people's reputation with our words. We've murdered people's self-esteem with our criticism. We've talked about people in ways that were not kind and often not truthful. And Matthew, Jesus looked at me, Matthew, he said, and he looked at me and he said, I want you to follow me. And Matthew says, I've never gotten over that invitation. And because I've never gotten over it, every day, every hour, every minute, I guard my life's activities jealously. I think Matthew could have a word to the church this day. It would be a cautionary note. Don't allow yourself to get so comfortable with Jesus, the invitation and the presence in your life, that your lives end up no different than the non-follower. Matthew makes it clear in his prologue we call the begats that Jesus came to save us in our sin. But the rest of the book goes on to show that Jesus came to save us from our sin. And what did the baby Jesus say as an adult? Many years later, he looked at a group of people who were broken because of what they'd done, broken because of what they'd had done to them, a group of people who were weary because of what they'd done and because of what people had done to them. And he says, come unto me, move in my direction. All of you who are weary, you're tired, you're tired, you're tired. You're tired of it all. It's just not working for you. You who are weary and burdened by this sin and the burden of guilt and shame and burden of what people have said and what you've said, come to me, and I'll give you rest. Learn from me. Sit at my feet. Learn what God your Father is really like. Jesus said, because I know. Learn from me how to treat other people. And believe me, it doesn't matter how long someone's been sitting in church. Doesn't mean that you're learning how to treat other people. Learn from me how to find purpose and meaning. Learn from me. If you do it over time, you'll find rest on the inside in spite of everything going on the outside. That, dear friends, is the Christmas message. So, Lord, as these, the prologue, as these begats, as these things that we're so tempted to roll our eyes at, as we lift the curtain and realize what Matthew's really doing, it's incredible. Matthew wanted everyone to know that everyone was welcome. And Lord, let us never take that invitation lightly. Let us not become smug in our years of association. Remind us that we too are sinners in need of a Savior, and that we may go forth with the good news that you welcome all, and that we're a part of that group who has been welcomed. Never let us forget that, O Lord, especially in this season, this time of lamentation, this time of Advent waiting. And we ask this in the name of the one who we are waiting for, Jesus the Christ. Amen.